Saturday morning, coffee still hot in my hand. I step outside and freeze. 37 cars, packed across my grandfather's field, the land the old man cleared with his bare hands, acre by acre, before I was born. Every wiper had an orange slip tucked under it. $20, HOA community parking. I walked straight to her door, receipts in my fist. She opened it, looked at the papers, looked at me, and smirked.
Your field was just sitting there rotting. I did this neighborhood a favor. You should be thanking me.
I told her to refund every dollar and clear my land.
I'm not done with you yet.
She said, "Sue me," and shut the door in my face. I walked back across that field. 37 cars around me, her cash box still clicking behind that door. I looked at my grandfather's land one more time. Then I smiled. You'll understand why by the end of this video. What would you have done standing on that porch? Called 911 right then, or played the long game? Drop your state below. HOA laws are wild and different everywhere. Let me take you back about 3 years, to a small, unincorporated community called Crestfield Hollow, sitting about 40 minutes outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. It's the kind of place where the roads still turn to gravel past the second bend, where you can smell pine sap in the morning and hear the creak if the wind is right. Not fancy, not pretentious, just land. My name for this story is Garrett Wellstone, and I'd lived on that property my whole life. My grandfather, Elmer Wellstone, bought the original parcel in 1961, 62 acres of mixed woodland and cleared pasture, paid for in cash after 20 years of working a textile mill. That's not a metaphor. That's a man who worked a literal loom for 2 decades so his family could own something that couldn't be taken away. Well, almost couldn't be taken away. When Granddad passed in 2004, the property transferred to my father. And when my father passed in 2018, cancer, quick, brutal, the kind that doesn't negotiate, it came to me. I kept about 12 of those acres around the old farmhouse. The remaining 50 I sold off in parcels over the years to cover estate taxes and my father's medical bills. 4 of those parcels became a planned subdivision, 18 homes, paved cul-de-sac, mailboxes that all matched, the whole suburban package. Because that subdivision sat adjacent to my remaining land and shared one access road, an easement I'd granted during the sale, the developer had folded it into a homeowners association, standard stuff on paper. The HOA governed the subdivision. My land was not part of that HOA. My deed was completely separate. I had not signed any HOA documents. I had paid no HOA dues. I owed those people exactly nothing. That detail is important. Hold on to it. Now, I kept about 4 of my acres as an open grass field, originally my grandfather's old hay pasture. Flat, firm ground, great drainage. I'd mow it twice a year, use it for storage sometimes, let my cousin run his dogs out there on weekends. Nothing formal. Just my land, doing what land does when you leave it alone. Enter Diane Poole. Diane had moved into the subdivision about 2 years after it opened. Mid-50s, recently retired from a career in property management, which, as far as I could tell, meant she had spent 30 years telling other people what they couldn't do with their stuff. She had the energy of someone who had been waiting their entire adult life for a position of real authority, and the moment a slot opened on the HOA board, she took it. Within 18 months, she was president. She was the kind of neighbor who photographed your trash cans if they were still at the curb at 6 p.m. on collection day, who sent certified letters about paint colors, who showed up to community events with a clipboard. She had a way of smiling while she talked to you that never quite reached her eyes, the smile of someone keeping score. The first time she came to my property, she knocked on my door and informed me very politely that the undeveloped parcel adjacent to Crestfield Hollow Estates was creating what she called a visual blight concern for the neighborhood, and asked if I'd considered partnering with the community on its management. I told her it was my private land, I managed it myself, and I appreciated her concern. She wrote that down on her clipboard. I should have paid more attention to that clipboard. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Friday night in late October. I'd been out of town for 2 weeks, business trip to Charlotte, then a few days helping my aunt move. I pulled back onto my gravel drive just after 9 at night, headlights cutting through the dark, and the field to my left looked full. Not forest full, car full. I counted 11 vehicles, pickup trucks, a minivan, a couple of sedans. just sitting there in my pasture in the dark, like a used car lot had spontaneously generated on my property. I got out, crunched across the frost-stiff grass. You could hear it, that dry October crunch underfoot like walking on cornflakes, and checked one of the windshields. There was a paper slip tucked under the wiper. Orange paper, printed text, a dollar amount, $15, event parking, Crestfield HOA Community Fall Festival. I stood there for a second in the cold air, breath fogging, the distant sound of music and generator hum drifting from the subdivision's community green about 300 yards away. They were having a party, and they had turned my field into a paid parking lot. I walked back to the house, sat down, and did a very deliberate thing. I did not call the police. Not yet. I got a legal pad and wrote down the date, time, number of vehicles, and the exact text of that orange slip. I photographed every car, license plates, the slip, the field. I sent the photos to my own email with a time-stamped subject line. That's called documentation. Get used to that word. The next morning, I walked over to the festival, still going, apparently a 2-day thing, and found Diane at a table near the entrance, wearing a vest with the HOA logo on it, holding a cash box, an actual lockbox. She saw me coming and her expression did something complicated. A quick flicker of something that wasn't quite guilt, replaced almost instantly by that clipboard smile. "Garrett, so glad you could make it. Did you enjoy having the field put to good use?" I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that she had used my private property without permission, charged money to park on it, and kept those funds, and that I wanted to know what she planned to do about that. She pulled out, I am not making this up, a piece of paper, laminated. She handed it to me with the confident air of someone playing a trump card. It was a printout of what she called the Crestfield Hollow Community Access Agreement, a document she claimed had been filed with the county and gave the HOA the right to utilize adjacent undeveloped parcels for community benefit events, with 48 hours notice posted on the community board. "We posted notice on Monday," she said pleasantly. "That gives us through Sunday." I took a photo of that document and walked home. Here's what Diane did not know, or chose not to care about. I had never signed that agreement. I had never been presented with it. My attorney, a real estate lawyer named Clifford Marsh who'd handled my father's estate, had never mentioned it. The parcel sale documents from when the subdivision was developed contained no such easement clause. That agreement was, to put it technically, a piece of paper that Diane Poole had made up and laminated. But, and this matters, it looked official. It had a county seal graphic on it. It had clause numbers. It looked like the kind of thing a person might hesitate over, might second-guess themselves about, might go home and wonder, did I miss something? That was the point. Diane had been doing this long enough in property management to know that official-looking paperwork intimidates people. She was betting I'd back down. I called Clifford Marsh on Sunday morning. He called me back within the hour. I read him the language on the document verbatim. There was a pause on the line. "Garrett," he said, "that document doesn't exist in any filing I've ever seen on your parcel. Send it to me." I did. He called back that evening. "This is fabricated. There's no such agreement in the county records, no easement on your deed, and that seal is a graphic downloaded off the internet. It's not a real county seal. The format is wrong. She made this up." He paused again, and I could hear him choosing his next words carefully. "You need to let her keep doing it for a little while longer." That sentence didn't make sense to me yet. It would. Clifford explained his thinking over the next week, and I want to be honest. My first instinct was to put up a fence immediately, call the sheriff, and be done with it. That's what your gut tells you to do. That's the satisfying, immediate move. But Clifford had 30 years of property law under his belt, and he laid it out like a man assembling a machine with very specific tolerances. "Every time she uses that field under this fake agreement," he said, "she's committing civil trespass and potentially criminal fraud. Each incident is a separate act. Each dollar she collects is unjust enrichment under North Carolina law. If you shut it down now, you get a trespass judgment for one event. If you document 3 or 4 incidents, you may be looking at a pattern of fraud, potential misappropriation of HOA funds, and a much larger damages claim." Takeaway. In civil litigation, a documented pattern of misconduct is worth exponentially more than a single incident. Let the evidence accumulate before you strike. So I waited, and I documented. The second event was a Thanksgiving weekend community marketplace. Craft vendors, a few food trucks, the smell of funnel cake and diesel generator exhaust hanging in the cold November air. Diane had expanded. She was now charging $10 per car for a half day, $18 for the full day. I counted 31 vehicles at peak. My rough math said she was pulling in somewhere between $300 and $500 per event. I photographed everything again. I had a neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Augusta Finch, who lived across the road from the subdivision entrance and had no love for Diane after a multi-year dispute over a fence line, who agreed to watch the field entrance and note the times vehicles entered and exited. Augusta had a logbook. She used it with the seriousness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this assignment. I also filed a public records request with the County Register of Deeds, a simple, free process you can do in most counties in person or online, asking for any easement or access agreements recorded against my parcel number. The response came back in 8 days. No such documents on file. I printed that response and gave a copy to Clifford. Meanwhile, Diane was getting bolder. She'd apparently decided my silence meant compliance. At the next HOA board meeting, open to the public, which meant Augusta attended and took notes, Diane presented a budget line item called Community Parking Revenue and proposed rolling it into the HOA's operating fund for landscaping and signage. The other board members, who I suspect did not know the parking revenue was coming from my land, approved it. That was the moment the situation shifted from civil trespass to something considerably more serious. She was now committing what North Carolina law calls conversion, using another person's property to generate money and depositing that money into an account for her organization's use, with a board vote on record, with a budget line item. I will be honest with you, the sound of Augusta calling me that night to read me the meeting minutes, her voice absolutely vibrating with restrained delight, was one of the better phone calls of that year. But Diane wasn't finished escalating. She apparently got wind, through neighborhood gossip I suspect, the way things always travel in small communities, that I had been asking questions, because 2 days after that board meeting, I found a notice taped to my mailbox post. Not in the mailbox, that's federal, she wasn't stupid, but taped to the wooden post itself. It was a formal-looking letter on HOA letterhead, informing me that my undeveloped parcel had been assessed a $250 community eyesore fine for failure to maintain adequate ground cover on adjacent common-use property. She was fining me, for my own field, that she had been parking cars on. I photographed the notice, added it to the file, and called Clifford with what I genuinely believe was a cheerful voice. Because here is the thing about people who have wielded small authority for a long time. They do not know how to read silence. They interpret it as weakness. Every aggressive move Diane made, every fine, every fake document, every budget line, she thought she was winning. She was actually just building my case, brick by brick, like a woman who didn't realize she was constructing her own courthouse. By January, Clifford had compiled what he called a genuinely impressive body of evidence. His words. I have them in an email. We had 4 documented parking events spanning 11 weeks, photographic evidence of vehicles on my property at each event, Augusta's handwritten vehicle logs with times and dates, the fraudulent Community Access Agreement document, the county's written confirmation that no such easement existed, HOA meeting minutes showing the parking revenue being formally appropriated into their operating budget, and one $250 bogus fine on HOA letterhead. We had Venmo transaction records, because of course Diane had also been collecting digital payments under a handle that said Crestfield Parking, totaling what Clifford estimated at somewhere between $1,800 and $2,400 over the documented period. Clifford also brought in a second attorney, a woman named Priscilla Okafor, who specialized in HOA law and had, by her own description, a particular interest in HOA boards that forget their fiduciary limits. She reviewed everything and added a crucial piece. Diane had potentially violated North Carolina HOA statutes by collecting revenue not authorized in the HOA's CC&Rs, which constituted a breach of her fiduciary duty as board president. Takeaway: HOA board officers have a legal fiduciary duty to act in the interest of the membership. Misappropriating revenue from a non-HOA property can constitute both a breach of that duty and personal financial liability. Now, while Clifford and Priscilla were assembling the legal architecture, Diane was, with beautiful timing, making things worse for herself in ways I couldn't have scripted. She had apparently decided that the reason I hadn't confronted her again was because I was intimidated, and that a little more pressure would seal my silence permanently. She went to two of my neighbors, a retired electrician named Boyd Strickland and a woman named Terry Haverford, who ran a small landscaping business, and told each of them, separately, that she had spoken with the county, and that my field was being considered for annexation into the HOA's common area due to prolonged abandonment. Abandonment of land I mowed, used, paid taxes on, and held clear title to. Boyd called me immediately. Terry called me an hour later. Both of them were angry on my behalf. Boyd in a low, flat, "this is not right" way. Terry in a higher-pitched, faster-talking, "I know what she's doing" way. Both agreed to give written statements about what Diane had told them. Those statements went into the file. Then Diane did something that moved us from civil dispute into genuinely different territory. She filed a complaint with the County Code Enforcement Office, alleging that my field contained unauthorized fill material and possible illegal dumping that created a drainage hazard for adjacent properties. I got a notice from the county. An inspector came out, walked the field, a flat, well-drained, clean grass pasture, looked around for about 4 minutes, and left. The complaint was dismissed as unfounded, but here's why it mattered. Filing a false code enforcement complaint is, in North Carolina, actionable under the state's abuse of process doctrine. It's not criminal on its own, but it is civil ammunition, and it showed a pattern of using official channels to harass and intimidate. Priscilla added it to the complaint she was drafting. I want to give you a sensory picture of where I was mentally during all this, because I think it's important. I was not panicking. I was not losing sleep. I was sitting in my grandfather's kitchen, the same linoleum floors, the same smell of old wood and heating oil, and every single thing Diane did felt less like a threat and more like a gift. Every escalation was another exhibit. Every fake document, every false complaint, every whispered conversation she had with my neighbors, thinking I'd never find out. It was all inventory. The trap wasn't set yet, but the walls were closing. In February, Clifford called me with what he described as the thing that changes everything. His voice had that particular tone, measured, deliberate, that lawyers get when they're about to say something that reorders the board. He had been doing a title search on the original subdivision development documents, the full chain of title going back to my grandfather's deed, and he'd found something. When I had sold those parcels to the developer back in 2019, the sale had included a recorded, shared access easement that granted the subdivision residents the right to cross my remaining land to access the creek trail at the back of the property. A pedestrian easement, foot traffic only, explicitly not for vehicles, not for commercial use, not for event parking. Here's where it got interesting. That easement document contained a clause, standard boilerplate in North Carolina easement law, specifying that any commercial exploitation of the easement property by the easement holder would result in immediate termination of the easement and entitle the landowner to all revenues derived therefrom plus treble damages. Treble damages. That means triple. Diane had not just been trespassing, she had been exploiting a legitimate easement for commercial purposes, which under the explicit terms of that easement document meant she had already voided the easement, and the HOA now owed me 3 times the revenue she'd collected. But that wasn't even the best part. Clifford had also obtained Diane's personal property management license records. She was still licensed, and her license, issued by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, required holders to act in accordance with fiduciary and ethical standards in any property-related activity, not just when working as a professional, but as a condition of holding the license. What Diane had done, fabricating an access agreement, collecting money under false pretenses, filing a false code complaint, was, in Priscilla's assessment, grounds for license revocation. Her career, her license, the thing she'd built her identity around for 30 years, all of it was in play. There was one more element. Going through the HOA's public filings, which any HOA member or affected party can request, and which Diane had apparently never expected anyone to actually read. Priscilla found that the HOA's governing documents explicitly prohibited the board from collecting revenue from non-HOA property. There was a specific clause. The board members who had voted to add community parking revenue to the operating budget had unknowingly ratified something that violated their own charter. Every one of them was potentially exposed to personal liability for those funds, unless they cooperated with correcting it, which meant Diane's fellow board members were about to become very motivated to distance themselves from her. We had her from 4 different directions simultaneously: civil trespass and conversion, HOA fiduciary breach, state licensing violation, and treble damages under the easement clause. I sat with that information for a day, not because I was uncertain, I was very certain, but because the next move had to be surgical. You only get one moment of maximum leverage. You don't spend it early, and you don't spend it small. I told Clifford and Priscilla, I want to do this once, in public, in front of witnesses, with no room for Diane to reframe or minimize or quietly resign and slip away. I wanted the community to see it. They both smiled. I could hear it over the phone. The plan came together over 3 weeks in late February and early March, and I want to walk you through it because every piece has a logic, some of it legal, some of it practical, some of it just deeply satisfying if you think about it the right way. The tow arrangement. First, the field itself. Crestfield Hollow's spring kickoff celebration was scheduled for the second Saturday of March, a big deal on the community calendar, traditionally drawing 60 to 80 cars. Diane had already announced on the HOA Facebook page that community parking would be available at the adjacent field, $15 flat rate. I had screenshots. I contacted a towing company based in the next town over, a family operation called Hendricks Recovery, run by a man named Walt Hendricks, who had himself been in an HOA dispute several years prior, and was, let's say, philosophically aligned with my situation. Walt and I signed a formal contract designating him as the authorized tower for my private parcel, effective March 11th. The contract included signage language compliant with North Carolina Towing Statute, GS 20-219.2, which requires that private property towing be authorized by the landowner and that proper notice signs be posted. Walt ordered 6 signs, bright red, 9 inches by 12 inches, reading, "Private property, no parking, unauthorized vehicles will be towed at owner's expense, authorized by Wellstone Property, Hendricks Recovery." North Carolina law requires those signs to be posted at all entrances to the property and visible from the road. We plan to post them on the Thursday before the event. 2 days' notice, visible, legal, unambiguous. Takeaway. Under NCGS 20-219.2, a landowner can authorize a tow company to remove vehicles from private property, as long as proper signage is posted at each entrance. No police involvement required. The legal notification. Clifford drafted a formal demand letter, sent by certified mail to Diane Poole personally, and to the HOA's registered agent, delivered on the Wednesday before the event. The letter notified her that 1. The field was private property with no easement for vehicle parking. 2. The HOA's Community Access Agreement was a fraudulent document with no legal standing. 3. The commercial use of the easement had voided it under its own terms. 4. Diane was personally liable for treble damages on all collected revenue. And 5. Any vehicles parked on the field on Saturday would be towed at their owner's expense. The letter was polite, professional. It was also a hand grenade. The board Priscilla reached out separately, quietly, to 2 of the other HOA board members, people who had no idea what Diane had actually been doing. She explained their potential personal liability exposure. Both of them asked, almost word for word, the same question. What do we need to do to not be part of this? The answer was simple. Attend the spring event, let things play out, and do not interfere with anything that happened in the field. They agreed, both of them. Augusta Finch had one job on Saturday. Stand at the road with her logbook and note every car that turned into the field after the signs went up. She'd been doing this for months anyway. This time, she'd also have a cell phone pointed at the entrance, for documentation purposes. Augusta treated this assignment with the gravity of a military operation, and the enthusiasm of someone who had been wronged by a neighbor's fence for 7 years and was transferring all of that energy into this single Saturday. The HOA Facebook group. On Friday afternoon, I posted a simple message to the Crestfield Hollow Neighborhood Facebook group, which was open to the public, not moderated by Diane, and followed by most of the subdivision's residents. The post read, "Notice to Crestfield Hollow residents. The grassy field adjacent to the subdivision is private property and is not authorized for parking for tomorrow's event. Tow signs will be posted. Any vehicles parked there will be towed at the owner's expense. Please share with your guests." Within 2 hours, 43 people had liked it, 17 had commented. Diane had posted 2 replies, both variations of, "This has been approved through proper HOA channels," and I had simply responded to each one with, "No such approval exists. The county deed records and the HOA's own CC&Rs confirm this. Please consult a real estate attorney before advising your neighbors otherwise." By Friday night, the neighborhood was watching. That was intentional. Stage set, signs ordered, tow truck on standby, attorneys briefed, Augusta locked and loaded. Saturday was going to be something. I want to tell you what Diane did on Friday evening, because it tells you everything about the kind of person she was, and why what happened on Saturday felt so completely, perfectly earned. She called a neighbor of mine, a man named Chet Beaumont, who lived down the road and occasionally let me borrow his tractor, and told him that I was in violation of HOA regulations, and that if he continued to assist me with property maintenance, the HOA would flag his property for compliance review. This was a threat. Chet had no HOA involvement and no regulatory exposure, but Diane didn't need the threat to be legally valid. She just needed it to feel scary. Chet called me, and I could hear in his voice that he was shaken. Mid-60s, a proud man, the kind of person who does not want legal trouble and gets cold when it's suggested. I told him clearly, "Diane has no authority over your property. This is intimidation, and by Monday morning, she will not be in a position to threaten anyone." He asked if I was sure. I told him I was very sure. Then, around 9 o'clock Friday night, someone, and I have no proof of who, but I have very strong intuitions, removed 2 of Walt's tow signs from the entrance posts of my field. The mounting hardware was still there. Clean removal, deliberate. Someone who knew where the signs were. I called Walt. He laughed. Not the reaction I expected, but the reaction of a man who had anticipated exactly this. "I made extras," he said. We reposted 4 signs before midnight, this time using tamper-evident Ziploc mounts and photographing each one in place with a timestamp. I also pointed a trail camera at each entrance, the kind deer hunters use, motion-activated, infrared, $60 at any sporting goods store. If someone removed those signs again, I'd have them on video. Nobody touched them again. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of early March day in central North Carolina that can't decide if it's still winter. Air sharp enough to see your breath, frost on the grass that crunched under your boots when you walked out to check the signs at 7 a.m. The sky was that pale blue that means the sun hasn't committed yet. Diane arrived at the field entrance at 8:15. I watched from the tree line. She had her cash box, her HOA vest, and a face I can only describe as performing confidence. Chin up, clipboard tucked under her arm, moving with the brisk energy of someone who has decided not to be deterred. She saw the signs. She stopped. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, reading a sign she absolutely understood, then took out her phone and made a call. From where I was standing, I could hear the tone but not the words. The call lasted about 4 minutes. When she hung up, she walked to her car, retrieved something from the back seat, a roll of duct tape and a piece of cardboard, and taped a handwritten sign over one of Walt's red signs. The handwritten sign said, "Authorized, HOA community parking, $15, approved access agreement on file." Over my legally posted, statute-compliant tow notice. I photographed this from behind a pine tree, breathing in that cold morning air, the smell of frost and pine resin, and whatever fuel she was running on. I texted the photo to Clifford, who responded within 2 minutes. "Perfect. That's obstruction of posted towing notice. Save everything." The first cars started arriving for the spring kickoff at 9. A few of them paused at my field entrance, read the signs, both signs, the official red one and Diane's cardboard override, and appeared to make individual decisions about who to believe. About half drove past my field and found street parking. The other half, encouraged by the HOA volunteers directing traffic at the entrance, pulled into the field. Augusta was at her post. Walt had 2 trucks staged a quarter-mile down the road, out of sight. Clifford and Priscilla were on their way. The county sheriff's office had been notified, not called for emergency, just made aware, that a civil towing action would be occurring on my property that afternoon and that there might be a disturbance. By noon, there were 39 cars in my field. Diane was at her table, cash box open, cheerfully collecting fees, apparently having decided that her cardboard sign had resolved the matter. It had not resolved the matter. The spring kickoff was in full swing by 11. There was music, a local cover band playing Tom Petty at a volume that said we rented speakers, and there were tables of baked goods and a bounce house for the kids, and the general cheerful Saturday energy of a community that, for the most part, had no idea what was about to happen. Diane had, sometime between 9 and 11, apparently made calls to at least 2 other board members urging them to stand with the HOA if there was a disturbance. Both of those board members, the same 2 Priscilla had spoken to quietly the week before, declined. One of them actually called Priscilla that morning to double-check that they were doing the right thing by stepping back. Priscilla assured them they were. One of the homeowners, a man named Terrence, who'd bought his house in the subdivision 3 years ago and had clashed with Diane over backyard fence height, had seen my Friday Facebook post and made his own inquiries. He'd pulled the county deed records himself, online, in about 15 minutes. He showed up Saturday morning with a printout. He showed it to 4 of his neighbors before noon. Information, once it starts moving in a small community, moves fast. Meanwhile, Diane had apparently gotten wind that Clifford and Priscilla were coming. A mutual acquaintance told me later that she had called a real estate attorney in Raleigh that morning looking for emergency advice and been told, I'm told this was essentially verbatim, if what you're describing is accurate, you need to stop collecting money immediately and consult a criminal defense attorney. She did not stop collecting money. At 12:30, Clifford arrived in a dark blue sedan, parked on the road, and walked to where I was standing near the field entrance. He was in his Saturday clothes, khakis, a gray fleece, looking like someone's accountant uncle, carrying a leather folio. Priscilla arrived 5 minutes later in a red SUV. She was wearing professional clothes. She had a notepad. I introduced them to Augusta, who had been standing at her post for 4 hours and showed absolutely no sign of fatigue. Augusta handed them her logbook with the formality of someone transferring classified documents. At 12:45 p.m., Clifford walked across the grass toward Diane's table. I followed, a few steps behind. Diane saw him coming and, I watched this happen, ran through a very visible internal calculation. She didn't know who he was. He didn't look threatening. She defaulted to her standard approach. Clipboard smile, chin up. Welcome to the spring kickoff. Parking is... Clifford held up his folio and opened it. Ms. Poole, my name is Clifford Marsh. I'm Mr. Wellstone's attorney. I'm here to formally notify you in person that the certified demand letter delivered to you Wednesday has not been complied with, that you have obstructed legally posted tow notice signage this morning in violation of North Carolina General Statute 20-219.2, and that towing of all unauthorized vehicles will begin at 1 p.m. He paused. I'd also like to inform you that your continued collection of revenue under a fraudulent access agreement constitutes ongoing civil fraud and will be included in our complaint. Diane's clipboard smile did something interesting. It held for about 2 more seconds on pure muscle memory, then fell. You can't, she started. We can, Clifford said pleasantly, and we are. She turned to me. Garrett, I think there's been a misunderstanding here that we can... There's no misunderstanding, I said. There never was. She pulled out her phone. She made a call. I don't know who she called. Whatever they said did not help. At 12:58 p.m., Walt Hendricks pulled his first truck onto my field. Here is what 39 car owners look like when they realize their vehicles are being towed. First, nobody believes it. Then one person sees it, says something to a second person, and within 90 seconds, half the parking field is in motion. People leaving the festival in a hurry, cups still in hand, some with kids on their hips, all heading toward the field at that fast walk that people do when they're trying not to look like they're running. Walt and his crew, 3 trucks total, running efficiently, had already hooked 2 cars before the crowd reached the field. They were professional, methodical, and entirely unbothered. Walt had done this before. He was not going to be yelled out of it. The first confrontation came from a man in a Carhartt jacket, not a resident, just a visitor who'd parked in what he was told was authorized parking, who got in Walt's face and demanded to know who authorized this. Walt pointed at the red sign, still clearly visible despite Diane's cardboard addition. Landowner posted notice. I'm the authorized tow company. There's the number to call. I paid $15 to park here. Talk to whoever took your $15, Walt said, and hooked the next car. The crowd at the field entrance was now probably 60 people, maybe more, spilling back toward the festival tables. The Tom Petty cover band had stopped playing. I saw the bassist shade his eyes toward the field and just sort of stand there with his guitar. Diane was at the center of it. She was talking, fast, loud, with her clipboard, trying to explain to multiple people simultaneously that there had been an administrative error and that the HOA would make it right. People were asking her, with increasing specificity, what the access agreement was, where it was filed, and could they see it. She kept saying it was on file. Someone said, I just looked it up on the county website, and there's nothing there. Diane said the county records were sometimes delayed. Another person pulled out their phone. Priscilla, standing to one side, spoke at normal volume to anyone who asked. The field is private property. There's no legal access agreement. The HOA does not have the authority to charge for parking here. If you paid a fee, you were charged for something the HOA had no right to sell. You may want to request a refund. That sentence, you may want to request a refund, hit like a stone in still water. Rings went out. At 1:40 p.m., 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. Not in response to an emergency call. They were already aware the situation was developing. They assessed it quickly. Lawful tow operation on private property, proper signage posted, legitimate authorization documents in Walt's hands. They spoke to Diane briefly. One of them asked to see the access agreement she'd been referencing. She showed him the laminated paper. He looked at it for a long moment, looked at the county records Clifford had printed, and handed the laminated paper back without comment. His expression said everything he wasn't saying out loud. At 2:15, the moment that people at the festival will probably be talking about for years, a woman who'd driven 45 minutes to the event, a friend of a subdivision resident, completely uninvolved in any of this, had her minivan hooked. She walked up to Diane in front of at least 40 witnesses and said, in a voice that carried, "You told my friend this was approved parking. I have 3 kids. I'm 45 minutes from home, and my van is on that truck. Who is paying for my tow?" Diane said, "The HOA will address all concerns." "I'm not asking about concerns. I'm asking who is writing me a check." One of the board members, the one who had pulled county records, stepped forward and said, publicly and distinctly, "The HOA didn't authorize this parking. The board is looking into how this was represented to the community." That was the mic drop moment. Not me, not Clifford, one of Diane's own board members, in front of a crowd, on a Saturday afternoon in March, in the cold sunshine, with the smell of funnel cake still in the air, and 37 cars being loaded onto trucks. Diane Poole stood at the edge of her table with her cash box and her clipboard and her laminated document, and for the first time in what I suspect was a very long time, she had nothing to say. By 5:47 p.m., well before sunset, the last car had been removed from my field. The grass was still there. The signs were still there. Augusta's logbook was complete. 37 cars towed. 100% of my property cleared. 0 legal complications. Every move documented, authorized, and lawful. The fallout came quickly, as these things do when the evidence is already assembled. Diane Poole resigned from the HOA board 11 days after the spring kickoff, in a letter that described her departure as a difficult personal decision due to health and family considerations. She made no mention of tow trucks, fabricated documents, or Venmo accounts named Crestfield Parking. The HOA, under its newly reconstituted board, now chaired by Terrence, the man who'd pulled the county records on his own, settled with me within 6 weeks. They paid back all documented parking revenue, plus the treble damages triggered by the easement clause. a total that came to just over $7,400. They also issued a formal written apology to the neighborhood, acknowledged that the community access agreement had no legal standing, and updated their governing documents to explicitly prohibit collecting revenue from non-HOA property. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission received a complaint regarding Diane's license. I'm not in a position to say what came of that process, because licensing proceedings are not always public. What I can say is that Clifford filed the complaint, the documentation was thorough, and I have not heard of Diane working in any property-related capacity since. Chet Beaumont got no compliance review. His fence is fine. Augusta Finch framed a copy of the settlement letter and hung it in her kitchen, which I think is entirely appropriate. Now, what happened to the field? My grandfather had cleared that land by hand. My father had paid taxes on it during years when money was genuinely tight. I had held on to it through the estate process, through the medical bills, through everything. Not because it generated income, but because some things you don't sell. After this was all done, I sat in his kitchen and thought about what he would have wanted done with it. The $7,400 settlement, combined with a small matching donation from 2 local businesses, funded the establishment of the Elmer Wellstone Community Outdoor Classroom, an outdoor education space on 3 acres of the field, built in partnership with the Crestfield County School District. Raised garden beds, a weather station, a small creekside trail extension, and 2 covered seating pavilions. 800 students from 3 elementary schools used it in the first year. The remaining field? Still mine, still private, still equipped with trail cameras and a tow authorization contract, because I didn't get here by being careless. There's a larger point in all of this that I want to leave you with. Not a legal lecture, just an observation. Petty authority depends on 2 things to function: your uncertainty about your own rights, and your reluctance to spend energy defending them. The moment you remove both of those, it collapses. Diane had a laminated piece of paper, a cash box, and 30 years of experience making people feel like they'd missed something. What she didn't have was a single legal leg to stand on. Know your deed. Know your easements. Know that public records are public for a reason. Know that a documented pattern of misconduct is worth more than an angry confrontation, every single time. And know that tow trucks, deployed legally at the right moment with proper signage and authorization, are a remarkably efficient solution to a wide range of problems. My grandfather would have appreciated the efficiency.